All right, let's switch over to the web content. There's a unique concept within mobile web called the viewport. The viewport doesn't, the concept of a viewport doesn't exist at all on the desktop. It is uniquely web-based. The idea is when your device gets a web page, it's going to, you can think of it as printing the web page out on a nice big sheet of paper. And then your device acts as a little window moving over the page that's been printed out. So when you scroll on a page, you're basically moving that little window to different parts of the page, of that printed page on the, that's on the floor. You just have that window and it's moving around. When you zoom, what you're really doing is you're changing the size of that window. So when you zoom in, you're making that window smaller so that it's only able to grab a smaller part of the page that you're viewing. There are a large number of ramifications for this approach. One example is you're not able to have fixed elements within a page. You're not able to, say, have a banner that sits at the top of your page and never moves. Because in the mobile realm, a page doesn't actually move. A page stays still, and it's your viewport that moves. So there are discussions within the Android community about adding support for this. Android 4 it was just released. I believe they were planning on adding support for it, but it hasn't been tested yet. But Apple has not announced any plans to support some kind of fixed positioning, so it's not really something that you can support in a cross-platform way. Another thing to keep in mind about all this is if you don't do any kind of special markup for the viewport will usually be narrower than the page that gets printed on that big page that got printed out. Meaning your users will have to do horizontal scrolling in order to see what goes off the side of the page, the side of the viewport. There's special markup available that you need to turn on specifically that forces the width of the page to be the same as the width of the viewport at page load. Obviously that will change if you start doing zooming, but the idea is the page will start off the same size so that you only have vertical zooming. The reason that this is turned off by default is that if you have a site that's not designed for mobile content, this will often break. If you go back to the example I gave before of having the nav bar off the left side of the page, if you have a site that was not designed for mobile and you force the entire content of the page down to 320 pixels, well then that 200 pixel nav bar is going to dominate. So instead, almost all devices, except for the especially large devices, any moderately sized device will start off with a page which is larger than the viewport, and you have to do horizontal scrolling. What you're able to do is you're able to put in what's called a meta viewport tag and tell the browser, no, trust me, I know what I'm doing. I really want you to make the page the same size as the viewport. And therefore, and that's really what is the most important thing to creating a mobile site. Another issue at hand is the fact that we're really dealing with vastly different screen widths. You could be dealing with something which is 320 pixels wide. Some mobile devices scale up to as much as 1,024 pixels wide. And then you could actually be viewing your mobile site from a desktop browser. Or you could be creating a site that really works between both mobile and desktop. So if that's the case, there will be some things that you want to do conditionally depending on the size of the screen. Sorry to keep beating a dead horse, but going back to that nav bar, I've created sites where you have the nav bar viewable when you're on the desktop, but when you move over to a mobile device, it just disappears, and you have to go to a separate page to pull up your table of contents. The trick in order to get this to work is something called media queries. Media queries are a special form of CSS, and you're basically able to say, if my screen is between this width and that width, I want you to conditionally apply this CSS. And it really gives you a huge amount of flexibility in what you're able to do. I think we'll see an example of that later on when we look at the social KB. Media queries are also the same techniques that are used to create print style sheets. When you have a normal site and you go to File Print, and you get the nav bar and you get the logo, and you really don't want to be printing all that stuff out, the correct approach is to create a specialized print style sheet that hides all of that content. Now, something else to keep in mind when creating mobile sites is that there are different usability standards for mobile sites. A nice simple example is the size of buttons. If anyone's ever pulled open an iPhone and gone to a normal site, and there are 3 links right next to each other, and you have gorilla thumbs like I do, and you try pressing on one of them, you always click on the wrong link. That's a problem. That's a very bad usability case. So in general, what we want to provide are nice, big, easily clickable buttons that even users that have fat thumbs don't accidentally click on the wrong button. Some things that are less important but still give the user a better experience are how we style things. Rounded corners and gradients are both very common features in mobile development. The mobile browsers have built-in support for this. Internet Explorer does. Older versions of Internet Explorer do not yet, never included support for this kind of CSS out of the box. We never have that problem on mobile. All the major mobile platforms provide support for this kind of CSS. And another issue is hover. Let's say you're sitting on your desktop and you move your mouse over, over a link, and the link changes color. There's no analog to that in the mobile realm, because when you put your finger on the page, you've already done the click. There's no such thing as moving the mouse around. So you're not going to be able to use some of the hover behaviors that you get to use on desktop. So there are really 2 possibilities for creating a mobile site. You can create a dedicated mobile site, or you can take an existing desktop site and fix it for mobile. And the advantage of the latter is you get to have a single site, and you probably have less work overall. The downside is that it will not be an incredibly optimized mobile site. If you do a huge amount of work with media queries, you might get pretty close to that level of usability, but it won't necessarily be, it won't be 100% there. Let's say that you are going to go for one of these hybrid sites, which it's not a bad approach. A lot of sites are doing that. We use that as well, and it gets very good usability. The question is, what are you able to do? So mobile browsers are based on WebKit. WebKit is an open source platform. It was originally created by an open source project called KDE as something called KHTML. Apple forked it, created WebKit, and since then Google's come on board. Google provides support for it. A number of other web browsers are all backing it. So at this point, Google Chrome, Apple Safari, GNOME Epiphany, these are all web browsers that use WebKit out of the box. And in addition, WebKit is used by the mobile browsers on both Apple and Android devices. So when you're dealing with creating some kind of cross-system site, a WebKit-based browser is probably going to give you your best bet. A very close second is the Mozilla Firefox browser. Mozilla Firefox is built off of an engine called Gecko. There are a few other web browsers also built on Gecko. And Firefox has actually stayed very much on top of all of these emerging web standards. They have very strong HTML5 and CSS3 support. So in my testing, I'm not sure if I've actually seen any places where Chrome and Safari have strong support for something and Firefox is lacking. But the fact is, since it's not WebKit-based, there are different names for some of the same stuff. Linear gradient versus gradient with a linear parameter. There's slightly different things. So if you create output, which you've only ever tested on WebKit, it may not have all the functionality of Firefox, but it's usually just a few lines of code to get that into Firefox. The problem child in this is still going to be Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer does not support all of the CSS3 properties, has very minimal support for HTML5. Unless you do extra work to get that support in there, you have to use something called the HTML5 shiv. There are other libraries out there. There's something called PI, Progressive Internet Explorer, which adds support to Internet Explorer for a number of these kinds of elements. But all of this is extra work, and none of it will provide the same quality that a WebKit or a Gecko-based browser will provide. So if you want to have one of these sites work very well in Internet Explorer, there's actually a trick you can use called Google Chrome Frame. This is a plugin released by Google that can be installed inside Internet Explorer. And then if you add an extra line to your HTML, Google Chrome Frame will kick in and will actually use Chrome's rendering engine under the surface of Internet Explorer and give you the full functionality available for Chrome while inside an Internet Explorer window. At this point, Chrome Frame can be installed without administrator access, so it should be that just about anyone in any environment is able to install it. So that can actually be a good solution to the problem. Beyond this kind of hybrid approach of taking an existing desktop website and turning it into a mobile site, there's the opposite approach, which is to create it mobile from the ground up. If you're going to be going that route, I would not recommend reinventing the wheel. There are a number of frameworks out there, JavaScript and CSS frameworks, that provide support for a number of features out of the box. jQuery Mobile, JQTouch, CentralTouch are all platforms that are already in existence. They have a huge cross-browser testing. It's the level of testing that a single company is never going to get on a single product. They've dealt with a number of bugs in different platforms. They have grades for all the different browsers available. So Symbian from Nokia is supported, but it's a grade C browser, whereas older versions of BlackBerry are probably a grade B browser, and Windows Mobile has a grade B, while iOS and Android get grade A. They have full support for all the functionality. So if you're going to be going the route of creating a specifically mobile site, I would definitely recommend looking into one of these. What we've been using is jQuery Mobile. It's built on top of the jQuery library, which is a great JavaScript library in general. Don't get the two things confused. They really are separate projects. jQuery Mobile provides a lot of functionality. We're going to be seeing a demo of that in a bit, or right now.